Somewhere in the last 24 hours, you did something no other primate on this planet does as a matter of daily routine. You took something that was, at some point, alive. A plant, an animal, a grain. And before you let it anywhere near your mouth, you set it on fire, or boiled it, or otherwise cooked the life out of it first. You've probably never thought twice about this. It feels as natural as breathing. But here's the unsettling possibility. A growing number of scientists take completely seriously. You might not exist. Not with this brain, not with this body, not as this species, if your ancestors hadn't started doing exactly that. This is the story of the strangest habit in the animal kingdom, and the argument that it didn't just change what humans eat. It built the human brain. So let's start with the obvious question. Why does virtually no other animal cook? Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, share more than 98% of our DNA. They're smart. Some populations use tools. Some strip leaves off sticks to fish termites out of mounds. Some crack nuts open with real precision using rocks. And when researchers give captive chimpanzees a choice between raw and cooked sweet potato, they consistently pick cooked. They understand the appeal completely. They simply never figured out how to make it happen. Cooking, as far as anyone can tell, required a leap that, on this entire planet, only one lineage of ape ever made. To understand why that leap mattered so much, you need to understand what raw food actually costs your body. And the number is worse than you'd guess. Raw meat is tough. Muscle fibers are bound tightly together, and breaking them down enough to extract usable energy takes serious mechanical work. Heavy chewing, a powerful jaw, large grinding teeth. Raw starchy plants can be even worse. Many of them lock their energy inside rigid cell walls that human digestive enzymes can barely crack open on their own. Some raw foods that look perfectly edible pass through large stretches of the human gut essentially untouched. Their calories never extracted, completely wasted. In 2007, primatologist Richard Wrangham formalized an idea that had been circling anthropology for years into what's now called the cooking hypothesis. His argument boiled down. Heat is essentially outsourced digestion. Cook meat, and the proteins denature, the fibers loosen, and your gut suddenly has to do far less work to pull out the same calories. Cook a starchy root, and the rigid cell walls rupture, turning the starch into something your enzymes can actually use. When Wrangham and his collaborators ran direct net caloric yield studies, comparing raw versus cooked versions of identical foods, the gap wasn't small. In some conditions, cooking increased the usable calories your body actually absorbs by roughly 30% or more. Now here's where this stops being a story about nutrition and starts being a story about you, specifically, as a species. Your brain is one of the most metabolically expensive organs that has ever evolved. At rest, it burns roughly 20% of your entire body's energy budget, despite making up only about 2% of your body weight. No animal gets an upgrade like that for free. Something else in the energy budget has to shrink to pay for it. In 1995, anthropologists Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler proposed exactly what that something was, in what's now called the expensive tissue hypothesis. Comparing metabolically costly organs across primates, they found humans carry proportionally much smaller digestive tracts than you'd expect for a primate our size, while running proportionally enormous brains compared to any other primate that has ever existed. Their argument, this isn't a coincidence. It's a trade, paid for in raw metabolic bookkeeping. A smaller gut is cheaper to run, and the only way evolution lets you shrink your gut without your population simply starving is if the food entering it becomes dramatically easier to digest. Cooking does exactly that. So the sequence goes. Access to fire allows reliable cooking. Cooking makes food radically more calorie efficient. Freed up digestive energy becomes available for brain tissue instead, and over enormous stretches of time. Individuals who could support slightly bigger brains fed by slightly smaller guts simply outcompeted everyone who couldn't. Proving this directly has always been the hard part, because fire is brutally difficult to detect after 1 million years underground. Ash disperses, charcoal degrades. For a long time, the earliest solid evidence of controlled fire came from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, with burnt bone dated to roughly 1 million years ago, already remarkably old. And already lining up with the early expansion of Homo erectus, the first hominin with a noticeably bigger brain and smaller teeth than anything before it. Then, in a study published in 2026, researchers using a new bone luminescence technique on deeper layers of that exact same cave pushed the timeline back even further. Finding burnt bone deep inside Wonderwork Cave dated to as far back as roughly 1.79 million years ago. The burning showed up in tight, repeated clusters rather than scattered randomly, and the material sat more than 30 meters inside the cave, far past where a wandering grass fire could plausibly reach. The researchers' conclusion wasn't that these early humans could strike a spark from nothing. It was something almost more interesting. They were catching fire from natural wildfires outside, carrying embers deep into the cave, and deliberately keeping them burning until they eventually went out. Managed fire, not yet manufactured fire, hundreds of thousands of years earlier than anyone had proof for, and startlingly close to the very emergence of Homo erectus in the fossil record. That timing matters enormously, because Homo erectus is exactly where the anatomical signature this theory would predict actually shows up. Compared to earlier hominins, Homo erectus has a noticeably larger brain case, a lighter jaw, and significantly smaller teeth. Precisely what you'd expect if food was arriving pre-softened by heat, instead of requiring the heavy raw food chewing apparatus its ancestors needed. Its ribcage narrows too, consistent with a smaller, less bulky gut riding underneath it. To be fair to the field, this isn't a settled, unanimous story, and you should know that going in. Some archaeologists push back hard on Wrangham specifically, arguing that truly habitual, everyday fire use, the kind that would need to happen consistently enough, generation after generation, to actually shape evolution, doesn't show up unambiguously in the record until much later, closer to 400,000 years ago. Scattered evidence of managed fire a million years earlier, they argue, doesn't automatically prove daily cooking was already reshaping diets that far back. That debate is still completely unresolved. Hold on to both sides of it, because the biological logic is compelling even while the exact timeline stays contested. What isn't up for debate is what happens to modern humans who try to opt back out of this bargain entirely, on purpose, right now. Researchers have studied real communities of modern raw-foodists, people who, by personal choice, eat nothing that's ever touched heat. A widely cited study out of Germany tracked a large sample of long-term raw-foodists and found a significant share struggled to maintain a stable, healthy body weight, even with modern, cultivated, calorie-dense produce that dwarfs anything a forager could have found in the Ice Age. Among women on the strictest raw diets, researchers documented sharply elevated rates of amenorrhea, total loss of the menstrual cycle, a well-established biological signal that the body has entered energy conservation mode because it isn't taking in enough usable fuel to safely support reproduction. If today's raw-foodists, with today's supercharged produce, still can't reliably hit their caloric needs, it becomes very hard to picture an Ice Age population thriving generation after generation on raw food alone, while simultaneously trying to fund the most expensive organ upgrade any primate lineage has ever attempted. And cooking may have done more than reshape biology. There's a second, quieter benefit that almost never gets mentioned. Heat kills things. Parasites, bacteria, and pathogens that thrive in raw meat are frequently destroyed by cooking, meaning a population that cooked consistently would have been fighting off dramatically fewer foodborne illnesses than one eating everything raw. In a world with no medicine of any kind, that alone could have meaningfully tipped the odds of survival. There's also a social dimension worth sitting with. A cooking fire is fixed. You cannot cook while chasing prey across open grassland. Cooking meant stopping, meant a group returning at the end of a scattered day to a single shared source of heat and food. Some anthropologists argue this daily convergence point is where something close to the modern shared meal, and the cooperation built around waiting your turn and dividing food fairly, first took shape. Grabbing a raw scrap alone on the move requires none of that. Waiting together for something to finish cooking does. So the next time you turn on a stove, you're not performing some optional modern convenience layered on top of real eating. You're repeating, as closely as anyone can tell, the exact behavior that a serious and still debated body of research argues physically rearranged the human skull, shrank the human gut, cut down on ancient foodborne disease, and helped fund the metabolic bill for the very brain you're using.